Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. So, who's played a game of Monopoly? Pretty much everybody in the room has, yeah? So, the dream of everybody who's began a game of Monopoly is to gain complete control over that make-believe real estate market. Now, similarly, in a real-world free market system, companies dream of obtaining control over a product or service, edging out the competition, and they're thus becoming holders of a real monopoly. Now, the word monopoly comes from both the Latin monopolium and the Greek monopolion, which mean exclusive control of a commodity or trade. Now, just simply put, whenever a business exercises full control over a certain product or market sector, they control a monopoly. Now, this is the aim of all businesses, and according to Adam Smith, to widen the market and to narrow the competition, it is always the interest of dealers. And as the economy expands to include countless products and providers of service, or dealers, enormous corporations have emerged, gained control of market sectors, and expanded into massive entities with virtually unlimited power in their markets. And because of these trends, the US government has consistently instituted regulatory legislation limiting the formation of total monopolies. Now, because of these institutions, the question has repeatedly arisen throughout history, should monopolies be allowed to develop without government regulation? Or should the government ensure that monopolies remain checked and allow competition to grow? Now, while the government does have the requisite powers enumerated to them to enforce such regulations, we have to determine if they should be utilized more frequently to control the level of monopolization, or if the government should interfere less, or if the government is doing the correct amount of regulation in the US market today. Now, the rapid expansion of the economy throughout the United States history has resulted in the government realizing that if left alone, private businesses would seek to gain total market control by any means necessary. And in the age of unionization in the early 1910s, early 1920s, we saw those aims and those goals resulting in harm to personal property, to worker safety, to businesses themselves. Um, this was a problem, and so the U.S. government began taking more and more steps towards enforcing not only workplace safety but economic regulations on these businesses to limit the amount of control a business could have over the economy. Now, this ability to regulate trade is outlined in the Constitution. In Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution, it says, Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states. Now, initially, the concern was gaining a firm footing on the world trade market and with establishing regulations over trade between states. But as time passed by and as the economy developed new areas, those powers expanded to cover corporations and businesses in all areas of production, not just international interstate commerce. And this meant that it was a lot harder to properly regulate the economy. And now the necessity of protecting businesses from each other was realized in several pieces of revolutionary economic legislation. And one of the most impactful government actions was the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, which prohibits market control tactics they were experiencing at the time, such as price fixing, the operation of cartels, or corporate collusion to edge out competition or unreasonably restrain trade. Now, this act, which has been cited in many, many Supreme Court cases, is the foundation for many of the United States powers and modern legislation regulating the economy and the way businesses can interact with each other and the consumers. And we'll refer back to that in a minute. But, with speaking so much about monopolies, it's important to understand this. The development of monopolies is no strange occurrence in a free market system. When companies amass business and they take a clear market advantage over their competition, they can gain a monopoly. And one that I'm sure that we're all familiar with is the Henry Ford Motor Company. Does anybody here drive a Ford? No cheers. Wonderful. Now, Ford, just as an example, he created assembly lines, which broke down productions in specific stations, trained workers dedicated to a single task, and that's all they did. In The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith refers to this as the division of labor, which is a characteristic of companies that will eventually gain a monopoly and have gained monopolies historically. And this was the case with Ford. The innovation resulted in a lot higher production, much lower production cost. They were getting more money, and their cars cost less to produce, so they were able to build more cars. And just an example of the effect this had on the market is seen in the price of the Model T. The first one was sold at $850 in 1908, and assembly lines came along in around 1911, and by 1924, a new Model T cost consumers only $260, which means that in today's money, that's a price drop from $21,000 to $3,500 for a brand new top-of-the-line car that only took 93 minutes to produce compared to 12 hours. And other manufacturers, they couldn't keep up with Ford. Ford kept this assembly line thing a secret. And by 1914, only 3 years after they'd started it, they already were producing more cars in 1 year than all the other auto companies in the world combined. So by using this, they took the market by storm and are still one of the top producers of cars 100 years later. Now, this cycle occurs in every market sector where a company rises to dominance and then either stays there or loses its market presence. Now, more recently, it's Amazon that has emerged as king of the economic hill in many, many market sectors. Initially operating as a market platform where businesses could advertise and sell their goods, Amazon's innovation was a sales system where they directed traffic to higher selling clients. Now, businesses loved this and they just flocked to the platform. Then Amazon began producing their own goods based on what they were selling for other companies, and they began offering a multitude of services: wardrobe, ready meal, pharmaceutical, and groceries, which made other businesses lose a lot of their market value, a lot of their market presence, their consumer base. Mail services have lost billions to Amazon Air. A more specific example is Macy's. Now, they lost, over the course of 4 years, 66% of their share value. Blue Apron, which was a ready meal service, was dead before it launched. Amazon killed it. And other businesses suffered similar losses or completely folded, like Borders did in 2011. So you can see how monopolies have different effects on the market. And as previously stated, a balance for the exercise of governmental powers regulating businesses and the economy has to be found in order for prosperity to be fostered most effectively. Take Microsoft as an example. In the early 2000s, they were involved in a Supreme Court case about how they would make their computer hardware unable to run the software of other companies. Now, we think about that and we think, oh, that's not a big deal. But back then, Microsoft was pretty much the only manufacturer of computer hardware. There were several software companies, and if anybody's heard of the company Netscape, which I'm sure most of us haven't, Netscape was killed by an inability to find a hardware system capable of running their software. Now, the Supreme Court decided this was a predatory practice, which was forbidden in the Sherman Act, because actions had been taken to destroy competition to their monopoly. So that's an example where the government uses their power to break monopolies. And there's current debates on whether or not businesses with market-dominating acquisitions or value should be subjected to similar suits. Google owns 88% of internet search advertising, and they're under fire for arguably acting predatorily towards competitors. They just buy the competition. An antitrust suit preventing those activities would result in a much more competitive market. As Open Market's Matthew Stoller said, if you're looking for a silver bullet, probably the best thing to do would be to block Google from being able to buy any companies. Force the competition. Uber has been accused of price fixing, which is forbidden in the Sherman Act. Facebook has been in and out of the Supreme Court and congressional hearings. They control 70% of social media traffic and most of the information industry. Now, one could argue that breaking up Microsoft or maybe breaking up these large companies due to their dominance is the antithesis of free market economics, punishing the winner for winning by being better, cheaper, or more accessible. And such actions could be seen as the government abusing their regulatory powers for the sake of economic competition. Now, those cases could be seen as the government doing too much to alter the landscape of the economy. Well, let's ask the question, what if the government doesn't need to do anything to break up monopolies? Are they actually good? Do they not need to be regulated? Now, a PhD at the Copenhagen Business School, Stefan Slok Madsen, said, the problem with this understanding, meaning monopolies are bad, arises when concepts are taken out of context, which often happens in economic theory. When this happens, we assume that monopolies, where there's only one provider of a unique product, are bad and harm consumers. But we forget that the answer to the harm caused by monopolies depends on why there is just one provider in the first place. You got to understand that before you say, well, monopoly is really a problem. Now, the Atlantic's Leonard E. Reed said, the beneficial way is to become superior to everyone else in providing some good or service. The bad way is to use coercive force to keep others from competing effectively and also from challenging one's position. So basically, we see the difference between market superiority on one hand and predatory tactics on the other. The one being good, the other being bad. Microsoft used predatory tactics. In another case, in the Supreme Court case Texaco Inc. versus Dogger, Texaco and Shell, who were competitors, formed a joint venture called Equilon to control the sales of gasoline in the western U.S. Now, after a couple months of this, about 23,000 station owners claimed that they were violating the Sherman Act. They were colluding and price fixing. The Supreme Court decided that since Equilon was an independent venture with both companies investing in it and not the two companies acting together to price fix, they weren't violating the Constitution. It was simply a smart business move. So you can see the fine line here, where the government could have broken it up, but because of the way it was done, it was constitutional. So finding that balance, like I said, is very, very difficult. Some would argue that the government doesn't need to even do anything. Let the winners win. Who cares how they did it? Now this theory does have its issues. This opinion does have its issues. One, you can't simply let businesses kill other businesses. Particularly when the monopolization process is a large part of how the economy operates, and predictably will remain a large part of the economy for the foreseeable future. As monopolies develop and essentially take the market, other businesses arise and take business back. And there's a back and forth cycle between big and small companies. But unless the government ramps up its efforts to fight predatory monopolies, limiting acquisitions and instituting less liberal market caps, the economy will become increasingly polarized. Basically meaning that companies with more money would kill the companies with no money. So the government needs to exist in a capacity as a referee, not over-regulating, not under-regulating. Super corporations can be inherently harmful to economic health, considering that the more money flows in the more directions in an economy, the healthier the economy is. If it's just back and forth between the consumer and a single company, you lose a lot of economic health and capital value. It's an important issue. It's not like a monopoly board where you're reset every new game. Economics don't function so haphazardly. It takes years to develop a healthy economy and even longer to recover from any economic lapses, any recessions. So the consumers and the government must make a choice in favor of the free market or see the result of over-monopolization. It's tiny plastic houses and color-coded neighborhoods aren't on the line here, but the health of the national economy is. And whether or not efforts will be made to preserve that health and protect it from predatory companies remains to be seen. But it is an issue of today. Tomorrow brings the result. Thank you. Thank you.